Chapters 4 and 5 of Book 10 of Les Misérables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Kuiper. Les Misérables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo, translated by Elizabeth Florence Hapgood. Book 10, the 5th of June, 1832. Chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4. The Ebullitions of Former Days. Nothing is more extraordinary than the first breaking out of a riot. Everything burst forth everywhere at once. Was it foreseen? Yes. Was it prepared? No. Whence comes it? From the pavements. Whence falls it? From the clouds. Here insurrection assumes the character of a plot, there of an improvisation. The first comer seizes a current of the throng and leads it whither he wills, a beginning full of terror in which is mingled a sort of formidable gaiety. First come clamors, the shops are closed, the displays of the merchants disappear. Then come isolated shots, people flee. Blows from gunstocks beat against porte cochère. Servants can be heard laughing in the courtyards of houses and saying, "There's going to be a row." A quarter of an hour had not elapsed when this is what was taking place in 20 different spots in Paris at once. In the Rue Sainte-Croix de la Bretonnerie, 20 young men, bearded and with long hair, entered a dram shop, and emerged a moment later carrying a horizontal tricolored flag covered with crape, and having at their head 3 men armed, one with a sword, one with a gun, and the third with a pike. In the Rue des Nonandières, a very well-dressed bourgeois who had a prominent belly, a sonorous voice, a bald head, a lofty brow, a black beard, and one of those stiff moustaches which will not lie flat, offered cartridges publicly to passers-by. In the Rue Saint-Pierre-Montmartre, men with bare arms carried about a black flag, on which could be read in white letters this inscription: Republic or Death. In the Rue des Jeuneurs, Rue de Cadran, Rue de Montorgueil, Rue Mandar, groups appeared waving flags on which could be distinguished in gold letters the word section with a number. One of these flags was red and blue with an almost imperceptible stripe of white between. They pillaged a factory of small arms on the Boulevard Saint-Martin, and 3 armorers' shops, the first in the Rue Beaubourg, the second in the Rue Michel le Comte, the other in the Rue du Temple. In a few minutes the 1,000 hands of the crowd had seized and carried off 230 guns, nearly all double-barreled, 64 swords, and 83 pistols. In order to provide more arms, one man took the gun, the other the bayonet. Opposite the Quai de la Grève, young men armed with muskets installed themselves in the houses of some women for the purpose of firing. One of them had a flintlock. They rang, entered, and set about making cartridges. One of these women relates, "I did not know what cartridges were. It was my husband who told me." One cluster broke into a curiosity shop in the Rue des Villes Haudriettes and seized yataghans and Turkish arms. The body of a mason who had been killed by a gunshot lay in the Rue de la Perle. And then on the right bank, the left bank, on the quays, on the boulevards, in the Latin country, in the Quartier des Halles, panting men, artisans, students, members of sections read proclamations and shouted, "To arms!" broke street lanterns, unharnessed carriages, unpaved the street, broke into doors of houses, uprooted trees, rummaged cellars, rooted out hogsheads, heaped up paving stones, rough slabs, furniture and planks, and made barricades. They forced the bourgeois to assist them in this. They entered the dwellings of women. They forced them to hand over the swords and guns of their absent husbands, and they wrote on the door with writing, "The arms have been delivered." Some signed their names to receipts for the guns and swords and said, "Send for them tomorrow at the mayor's office." They disarmed isolated sentinels and National Guardsmen in the streets on their way to the town hall. They tore the epaulets from officers. in the Rue du Cimetière Saint-Nicolas, an officer of the National Guard, on being pursued by a crowd armed with clubs and foils, took refuge with difficulty in a house, whence he was only able to emerge at nightfall and in disguise. In the Quartier Saint Jacques, the students swarmed out of their hotels and ascended the Rue Saint Hyacinthe to the Café du Progrès, or descended to the Café des Sept Billards in the Rue des Mathurines. There, in front of the door, young men mounted on the stone corner posts distributed arms. They plundered the timber yard in the Rue Transnonain in order to obtain material for barricades. On a single point the inhabitants resisted, at the corner of the Rue Sainte Avoye and the Rue Simon le Franc, where they destroyed the barricade with their own hands. At a single point the insurgents yielded. They abandoned a barricade begun in the Rue du Temple, after having fired on a detachment of the National Guard, and fled through the Rue de la Cordière. The detachment picked up in the barricades a red flag, a package of cartridges, and 300 pistol balls. The National Guardsmen tore up the flag and carried off its tattered remains on the points of their bayonets. All that we are here relating slowly and successively took place simultaneously at all points in the city in the midst of a vast tumult, like a mass of tongues of lightning in one clap of thunder. In less than an hour 27 barricades sprang out of the earth in the Quartier of the Halles alone. In the centre was that famous house, Numéro 50, which was the fortress of Gine and her 600 companions, and which, flanked on the one hand by the barricade at Saint Merry, and on the other by the barricade of the Rue Maubuée, commanded 3 streets, the Rue des Arcis, the Rue Saint-Martin, and the Rue Aubry-le-Boucher, which it faced. The barricades at right angles fell back, the one of the Rue Montorgueil on the Grande Truanderie, the other of the Rue Geoffroy Langevin on the Rue Sainte Avoye, without reckoning innumerable barricades in 20 other quarters of Paris, in the Marais, in the Mont Sainte Geneviève, one in the Rue Ménilmontagne, where was visible a porte cochère torn from its hinges, another near the little bridge of the Hôtel Dieu, made with an écossais, which had been unharnessed and overthrown 300 paces from the Prefecture of Police. At the barricade of the Rue des Ménétriers, a well-dressed man distributed money to the workmen. At the barricade of the Rue Grenetat, a horseman made his appearance and handed to the one who seemed to be the commander of the barricade what had the appearance of a roll of silver. "Here," said he, "this is to pay expenses, wine, etc." A light-haired young man without a cravat went from barricade to barricade carrying passwords. Another, with a naked sword, a blue police cap on his head, placed sentinels. In the interior, beyond the barricades, the wine shops and porters' lodges were converted into guard houses. Otherwise, the riot was conducted after the most scientific military tactics. The narrow, uneven, sinuous streets, full of angles and turns, were admirably chosen. The neighborhood of the Halles, in particular, a network of streets more intricate than a forest. The Society of the Friends of the People had, it was said, undertaken to direct the insurrection in the Quartier Sainte Avoye. A man killed in the Rue de Ponceau, who was searched, had on his person a plan of Paris. That which had really undertaken the direction of the uprising was a sort of strange impetuosity which was in the air. The insurrection had abruptly built barricades with one hand, and with the other seized nearly all the posts of the garrison. In less than 3 hours, like a train of powder catching fire, the insurgents had invaded and occupied, on the right bank, the Arsenal, the mayoralty of the Place Royale, the whole of the Marais, the Popincourt arms manufactory, La Galiote, the Château d'Eau, and all the streets near the Halles. On the left bank, the barracks of the veterans, Saint Pellegrini, the Place Maubert, the powder magazine of the Deux Moulins, and all the barriers. At 5 o'clock in the evening, they were masters of the Bastille, of the Lingerie, of the Blanc-Manteau. Their scouts had reached the Place des Victoires and menaced the bank, the Petit Père barracks, and the post office. A third of Paris was in the hands of the rioters. The conflict had been begun on a gigantic